She sat across from him in the small downtown cafe, her designer handbag resting casually on the worn vinyl seat. Victoria Chen had built a tech empire worth over $40 million before turning 45. Yet here she was, genuinely laughing at the jokes of a man who couldn't afford to split the check. Her friends had warned her, her family had questioned her judgment. Even her business partners raised concerned eyebrows when they noticed the change in her demeanor. But there was something about Marcus Rivera that made all the zeros in her bank account feel meaningless for the first time in her adult life. Marcus worked as a community center coordinator, earning barely enough to cover his modest apartment in the city's affordable housing district. He wore the same 3 button-down shirts in rotation, took public transportation everywhere. And his idea of a fancy dinner was adding an extra topping to his homemade pizza. By every conventional measure, he was the exact opposite of what a successful millionaire woman should want. Society had written a clear script for her romantic life, and Marcus didn't fit a single line of it. Yet 6 months into their relationship, Victoria found herself more captivated than she had ever been with any of the wealthy executives, entrepreneurs, or investors she had dated in the past. Those men had impressive resumes and equally impressive egos. They took her to Michelin-starred restaurants but spent the entire evening checking their phones. They bought expensive gifts but never remembered the small details she mentioned in passing. They matched her status but never touched her soul. This is the true story of how an ordinary man with extraordinary character won the heart of one of the most successful women in Silicon Valley. It's a story that challenges everything we think we know about love, attraction, and what truly matters in a relationship. Because, as Victoria would later tell her closest friend, Marcus didn't have money or status, but he had something far more valuable. He had the courage to see her as a woman first and a millionaire second. And that made all the difference. In a world obsessed with power couples and matching tax brackets, the story of Victoria and Marcus stands as a powerful reminder that authentic connection transcends financial statements. We live in an era where dating apps allow people to filter potential partners by income level, where prenuptial agreements are discussed on third dates, and where a person's net worth is often considered more important than their actual worth as a human being. Against this backdrop, their relationship emerged as something rare and revolutionary. Victoria Chen's journey to millionaire status had been anything but typical. The daughter of immigrants who ran a small dry cleaning business, she had taught herself to code at 14, using library computers and free online resources. By 23, she had developed an algorithm that revolutionized inventory management for small retailers. By 28, she had sold her first company for $18 million. By 35, she had built and scaled to more successful ventures, accumulating wealth that would sustain multiple generations of her family. But success had come with unexpected complications. Victoria discovered that wealth acted like a filter, changing how people interacted with her. Men either felt intimidated by her success or were transparently interested in her money. Dates became performances where potential partners showcased their own achievements. Turning romantic dinners into networking events, she began to wonder if genuine connection was even possible when dollar signs hung visibly between two people. Then came Marcus Rivera, entering her life in the most unremarkable way possible. They met at a community fundraiser that Victoria had attended out of obligation, expecting to write a check and leave. Marcus was there coordinating the event, his genuine enthusiasm for the cause impossible to ignore. When he approached her, he didn't recognize her from magazine covers or tech conferences. He simply saw someone standing alone and decided to be welcoming. Their first conversation lasted 20 minutes and covered everything from childhood dreams to favorite books. Marcus never asked what she did for a living. He didn't position himself or pitch any ideas. He just talked to her like she was a normal person at a community event. For Victoria, it was startlingly refreshing. For the first time in years, she felt like herself rather than her resume. What followed was a connection that would test every assumption Victoria had made about relationships. challenge the opinions of everyone in her circle, and ultimately teach her the most important lesson of her life, that the currency of love cannot be measured in dollars, but in something far more valuable and infinitely more rare. When Marcus asked Victoria for coffee, he suggested a small neighborhood cafe he loved. Completely unaware that she could have bought the entire building without making a dent in her investment portfolio, Victoria agreed, curious about this man who seemed so comfortable in his own skin, despite having no idea who she was in the business world. The cafe was modest, with mismatched furniture and a handwritten menu on a chalkboard. Marcus arrived 5 minutes early, visibly nervous but smiling. He had chosen a table by the window and stood when she approached, a gesture of respect that felt both old-fashioned and endearing. The first thing Victoria noticed was that he made direct eye contact, something many people in her world had forgotten how to do authentically. They ordered simple drinks, and when the bill came, Marcus paid without hesitation, despite the fact that his coffee cost nearly an hour of his wages. Victoria later learned that he had budgeted carefully for this date, setting aside money from each paycheck because taking her out mattered to him. The gesture, small by her standards but significant by his, touched something deep within her. Their conversation flowed naturally through topics both profound and trivial. Marcus talked about his work at the community center with genuine passion, describing the after-school programs he had developed and the kids whose lives were changing because of the safe space he had helped create. He spoke about impact and purpose without once mentioning salary or advancement opportunities. His eyes lit up when describing a breakthrough moment with a troubled teenager, revealing values that resonated with Victoria's own motivations for building businesses. Victoria found herself being more honest than she had been in years. When Marcus asked about her work, she gave a simple answer about being in tech, and he didn't press for details. Instead, he asked what she loved about it, what challenged her, what she dreamed of creating next. The questions were thoughtful and personal rather than strategic or transactional. She realized she was having a conversation about work without it feeling like work. 3 hours passed like 30 minutes. The cafe staff began stacking chairs around them before they noticed how long they had been talking. Marcus apologized for keeping her so long, but Victoria was the one who didn't want the evening to end. When he walked her to her car, his eyes widened slightly at the Tesla, but he made no comment beyond saying it was a nice color. As she drove home to her penthouse apartment, Victoria replayed the date in her mind. Marcus hadn't tried to impress her with accomplishments or connections. He hadn't name-dropped or positioned himself as more important than he was. He had simply been present, interested, and authentic. In her world of constant posturing and performance, his genuineness felt like finding water in a desert. The next morning, she woke to a simple text message. "I had a wonderful time yesterday. Would you like to do it again soon? Maybe I could cook dinner at my place." Victoria smiled at her phone, knowing that his place was probably a fraction of the size of her walk-in closet. She texted back immediately, "I'd love that." It was in that moment, saying yes to a home-cooked meal in a modest apartment, that Victoria made a conscious choice. She decided not to reveal her wealth or status, at least not yet. She wanted to see where this could go without the complications that money always brought. She wanted to know if what she felt was real, and if what he felt could be real without the influence of her millions. That decision would prove to be both the most liberating and the most complicated choice of her relationship journey. Because falling in love is already complex, but falling in love while hiding a fundamental part of your identity adds layers of difficulty that Victoria was only beginning to understand. Dating Marcus meant entering a world Victoria had left behind years ago, a world where prices mattered and budgets were real constraints rather than abstract concepts. Their second date was the promised home-cooked dinner at Marcus's apartment, a cozy one-bedroom in a building that had seen better decades. He made pasta from scratch, having learned from YouTube videos, and the pride in his eyes when he served the meal made it taste better than anything from the 5-star restaurants Victoria frequented for business dinners. As their relationship developed over the following weeks, Victoria began navigating a delicate balance. When Marcus suggested activities, they were always thoughtful but budget-conscious. Free museum days, picnics in the park, movie matinees with discount tickets. Victoria found these dates charming and refreshing, a welcome change from the extravagant expectations of her usual social circle. But she also began to feel the weight of her secret. The complications started small. When Marcus mentioned he was saving up to replace his aging laptop, Victoria had to physically restrain herself from simply buying him a new one. When his car broke down and he talked about the difficult choice between expensive repairs and dealing with an unreliable vehicle, she bit her tongue instead of offering to solve the problem with a single phone call. Every instinct told her to use her resources to make his life easier, but she feared that money would change what was developing between them. Victoria started living a double life. During work hours, she was the decisive CEO, making million-dollar decisions without hesitation, commanding boardrooms, and negotiating complex deals. But in the evenings with Marcus, she became someone simpler, someone who split grocery bills and pretended to budget for concerts. She told herself it was temporary, just until she understood what they had together. Her friends began to notice the changes. Catherine, her closest friend and former business partner, confronted her over lunch at their usual upscale restaurant. "You've been different lately, happier, but also, I don't know, distracted? Who is he?" Victoria had shared that she was seeing someone, but had been vague about details. When Catherine pressed for information, Victoria found herself downplaying Marcus's background, not out of shame, but out of protectiveness. The real challenge came when their worlds threatened to collide. Victoria received an invitation to a charity gala, the kind of event she normally attended without question. This particular gala was important, honoring entrepreneurs who had made significant philanthropic contributions. Victoria was being recognized for her foundation's work in education technology. Declining wasn't an option, but attending meant revealing her identity. She invited Marcus anyway, framing it as a work obligation she couldn't avoid, downplaying her own role in the event. Marcus agreed enthusiastically, immediately worrying about what to wear. Victoria watched him stress about renting a tuxedo he could barely afford and felt a knot of guilt tighten in her chest. She was letting him struggle financially for an event celebrating her wealth. The irony was painful. The week before the gala, Victoria's anxiety intensified. She knew the evening would reveal everything she had been hiding. Her face would be in the event program. People would approach her, calling her by name, treating her with the deference she had grown accustomed to in professional settings. Marcus would see her wealth on full display, and she had no idea how he would react. She considered telling him the truth beforehand, rehearsing conversations in her mind during sleepless nights. But each imagined conversation ended badly in her thoughts. Would he feel deceived? Would it change how he looked at her? Would he question every moment they had shared, wondering if she had been testing him or playing some kind of game? The questions multiplied faster than she could answer them. The night before the gala, Marcus came over to her apartment for the first time. Victoria had been making excuses to always meet at his place or neutral locations. But he had surprised her with takeout after she mentioned a stressful day. She gave him the address of a modest apartment she still owned from her early days, not the penthouse she actually lived in. The deception was growing more complicated, and Victoria knew it couldn't continue much longer. After the gala, she promised herself she would tell him everything. She just hoped their connection was strong enough to survive the revelation. The evening of the gala arrived with perfect weather and perfect dread. Victoria had arranged for a car service to pick up Marcus, telling him she would meet him there due to early obligations. In reality, she needed time to compose herself, to prepare for the moment when her two worlds would finally collide. She arrived 2 hours early for photos and final preparations. Her stomach twisted with anxiety that had nothing to do with the hundreds of wealthy attendees who would fill the ballroom. Marcus arrived looking genuinely handsome in his rented tuxedo, his eyes wide as he took in the opulent venue. Victoria watched from across the room as he checked in at the registration desk. Saw the moment of confusion on his face when the staff member treated him with unusual attentiveness. Clearly recognizing Victoria's name as his +1, she made her way toward him, her heart pounding harder than it had during any business presentation. "Victoria, this place is incredible," Marcus said, kissing her cheek. "You must be really important at your company to be invited to something like this." His innocence was endearing and heartbreaking. She opened her mouth to tell him the truth, but at that moment, the foundation's director approached, greeting her effusively by name and title. "Ms. Chen, we're so honored to have you here tonight. Your keynote speech is scheduled right after dinner." She watched Marcus's face carefully as confusion flickered across his features, followed by a dawning realization. "Speech?" he asked quietly. Victoria took his hand, leading him away from the growing crowd. "We need to talk," she said, finding a quiet alcove away from the main ballroom. For the next 10 minutes, she explained everything: her companies, her wealth, her reasons for not telling him sooner. Marcus listened in silence, his expression unreadable. "So, when I was stressed about affording the tuxedo rental," he said slowly, "you could have bought the entire tuxedo shop." Victoria nodded, feeling tears threaten. "When my car broke down and I was choosing between rent and repairs, you were what? Testing me. Watching to see how the poor guy would handle his problems." His voice held an edge she had never heard before. "No," Victoria said firmly, reaching for his hand. He didn't pull away, but he didn't squeeze back either. "I wasn't testing you, Marcus. I was protecting something real. Do you know how many people have wanted to date me for my money? How many relationships became about my resources instead of me as a person? With you, for the first time in years, I felt like someone saw me, not my bank account." Marcus ran his hand through his hair, a gesture she recognized as his processing mechanism. "I understand that, Victoria, ideas. But you let me pay for dates I couldn't really afford. You watched me stress about money while you had millions. That doesn't feel like protection, it feels like deception." His words hit hard because they carried truth. Victoria had told herself she was preserving something precious, but from his perspective, she had been dishonest. Before she could respond, an organizer appeared, apologizing for interrupting but insisting Victoria needed to take her place at the head table. Marcus followed, still processing, as they were led to a prominent table near the stage. Throughout dinner, Victoria felt his presence beside her, like a physical weight. He was polite to the other guests, but the easy warmth between them had cooled. She barely tasted the expensive food on her plate. When her name was called for the keynote address, Victoria approached the podium with none of her usual confidence. She had prepared remarks about entrepreneurship and giving back, but standing at the microphone, looking out at hundreds of faces, including Marcus's troubled one, she made a split-second decision to speak from her heart instead of her notes. What came out was not the speech anyone expected. "I was supposed to talk tonight about success and philanthropy," Victoria began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "But instead, I want to talk about the difference between being rich and being wealthy, because I've recently learned they're not the same thing at all." She caught Marcus's eye in the audience. And what she said next would determine whether their relationship survived the night or ended with the last word of her speech. Victoria's impromptu speech captivated the ballroom in a way her prepared remarks never could have. "I have more money than I could spend in several lifetimes," she continued, her eyes occasionally finding Marcus in the crowd. "I can buy almost anything I want, travel anywhere, access any experience. But what I've learned recently is that all of that means nothing if you don't have someone who sees you rather than your success, who values you rather than what you can provide." She spoke about loneliness at the top, about how wealth can become an isolating force, creating walls instead of bridges between people. The audience, full of millionaires and billionaires, nodded in recognition. Many of them had experienced the same paradox. The more successful they became, the harder it was to find genuine connection. Victoria's vulnerability resonated in the silent room. "Someone I care about deeply is here tonight," Victoria said, departing entirely from any prepared script. "And he's currently questioning whether our relationship was built on honesty or deception. He's wondering if I was testing him, playing some kind of game with his life while I held all the cards. The truth is, I wasn't testing him. I was testing whether love could exist without the complication of money. And I got my answer, but possibly at the cost of the relationship itself." Marcus sat perfectly still, every eye in the room trying to identify who she was talking about. Victoria pushed forward, knowing she was exposing herself in a way that terrified her. "What I should have done is trust that what we had was strong enough to survive the truth. What I should have understood is that hiding who you are, even with good intentions, is still dishonesty. And that's a lesson I'm learning at this very moment, in front of all of you." She concluded her speech with words that came from the deepest part of her heart. Real wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in authentic relationships, in people who challenge you to be better, in connections that make you feel fully alive. I hope I haven't lost that tonight, because no amount of money can buy back trust once it's broken. And no portfolio can replace a person who loves you for who you are, rather than what you have. The applause was thunderous, but Victoria barely heard it. She searched for Marcus in the crowd as she left the stage, but his seat was empty. Panic flooded through her as she scanned the ballroom. Had he left? Had her public confession driven him away rather than bringing him closer? Catherine appeared at her elbow, gently guiding her through well-wishers who wanted to congratulate her on the speech. Finally, Victoria saw him. Marcus stood near the entrance to the terrace, his silhouette visible through the glass doors. She excused herself from the crowd and walked toward him, each step feeling like it carried the weight of her entire future. When she stepped outside, the cool evening air hit her face, and Marcus turned to face her. "That was quite a speech," he said quietly. Victoria couldn't read his tone. Was he angry, hurt, forgiving? She moved closer, leaving space between them, respecting his need for distance. "I meant every word," she replied. "Marcus, I'm so sorry. You're right. I should have trusted you with the truth from the beginning. I was scared, but that's not an excuse." Marcus leaned against the terrace railing, looking out at the city lights. "Do you know what hurt the most?" he asked. "It wasn't finding out you're wealthy. It was realizing that you didn't think I could handle it. You didn't trust me to see past the money to you. You assumed I would change, that I would become like every other person who sees you as a bank account instead of a human being." Victoria felt tears finally spill over. "You're absolutely right," she whispered. "And I don't know how to fix this except to promise that from now on I'll be completely honest with you. No more hiding, no more separate lives. If you're willing to give me another chance, you'll get the full truth of who I am, wealth included. And if that's too much, if this is where we end, I'll understand. But I hope it's not. Because these past months with you have been the most genuine, happiest time of my life." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, the city noise filling the silence between them. Finally, he turned to face Victoria fully, and she saw that his eyes were troubled, but not cold. "I don't want this to end," he said carefully. "But I also don't know how to navigate what comes next. Your world and my world are so different, Victoria. This isn't just about money, it's about lifestyle, expectations, social circles. I work at a community center. You run companies and give keynote speeches at galas. Those things don't define who we are," Victoria insisted, stepping closer. "You told me once that you measure success by impact, not income. You said that making a difference in one kid's life matters more than any promotion or raise. I remember that conversation because it reminded me why I started building companies in the first place, to create impact, to solve problems, to make things better. Our methods are different, but our values align." Marcus smiled slightly, the first crack in his serious demeanor. You remember that conversation? That was our third date. We were walking through the park, and you asked me about my dreams. Victoria nodded. I remember every conversation we've had. Because you're the first person in years who asked me about dreams instead of strategies, who wanted to know what drives me rather than what I've achieved. Okay, Marcus said, taking a deep breath. Let's try this, but we need some ground rules. First, no more secrets. About anything. Second, we figure out how to blend our worlds rather than keeping them separate. I meet your friends, you spend more time with mine. Third, we talk about the money stuff openly when it comes up, instead of pretending it doesn't exist. Can you do that? Victoria felt hope bloom in her chest. Yes, absolutely yes, to all of it. She reached for his hand, and this time he took hers, squeezing gently. There's something else, Marcus added. I need you to let me contribute in my own ways. I can't match your wealth, and I'm never going to be able to treat you to fancy restaurants or expensive gifts. But I need to feel like an equal partner, not someone you're taking care of financially. You already contribute in ways that matter more than money, Victoria said earnestly. You make me laugh. You challenge my thinking. You remind me to slow down and be present. You introduced me to your community center kids, and I've learned more from them about joy and resilience than from any business book. Those contributions are invaluable. Marcus. He pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her. I believe you mean that, he said into her hair. But there's going to be a learning curve for both of us. I'm going to feel insecure sometimes. You're going to have to be patient with me, and you might need to let me struggle with things occasionally, even when you could easily solve them with money. I need to maintain my sense of self. Victoria understood what he was saying. She had seen relationships where wealth disparity led to resentment, where the less affluent partner felt diminished or dependent. She didn't want that for them. What if we think of it as bringing different resources to the relationship? You bring emotional intelligence, community connections, and perspective. I bring financial resources and business networks. We share everything, but we each maintain our independence and identity. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. I like that framework. We're partners with different strengths, not a wealthy person and their dependent. We make decisions together, but we also respect each other's autonomy. He paused, then added with a hint of humor, though I draw the line at letting you buy me a new car. I'm getting my old one fixed, even if it costs half my savings. Victoria laughed through her tears. Deal, but can I at least recommend a good mechanic who won't overcharge you? Marcus smiled fully for the first time that evening. Now that I'll accept. He kissed her forehead gently. Come on, let's go back inside. I want to meet some of these people in your world, and fair warning, I'm going to be completely myself, which means I might accidentally offend some millionaires with my radical ideas about wealth redistribution. Victoria laughed again, realizing that his willingness to be authentic in her world was exactly what she needed. They walked back into the gala hand in hand, ready to begin the real work of building a relationship across the wealth divide. The weeks following the gala brought unexpected challenges and surprising joys as Victoria and Marcus worked to merge their different worlds. Victoria invited Marcus to a business dinner with her investors, where his fresh perspective on corporate social responsibility impressed the traditional finance crowd. He asked pointed questions about the social impact of their investment strategies, pushing them to think beyond profit margins. Victoria watched with pride as he held his own in conversations with people worth hundreds of millions, never intimidated, always authentic. In turn, Marcus brought Victoria deeper into his community center work. She started volunteering on Saturday mornings, helping high school students with college application essays and career planning. The teenagers were initially suspicious of her expensive clothes and polished demeanor, but Victoria's genuine interest and practical advice won them over. One student, Maria, told Marcus privately, "Your girlfriend is really cool for a rich person. She doesn't talk down to us." The couple established new rituals that honored both their lifestyles. Sunday mornings meant brunch at Marcus's favorite hole-in-a-wall diner, where the coffee was terrible but the company was warm. Friday evenings were reserved for cooking dinner together, alternating between his modest kitchen and her spacious penthouse. They discovered that happiness had little correlation with square footage. Laughter sounded the same in both locations. Money conversations became more open and less fraught. When Marcus's community center faced potential budget cuts, Victoria and he discussed how her foundation could help without creating dependency or undermining his leadership. They structured a grant that provided resources while keeping decision-making power with the community. Marcus appreciated her willingness to support his work without taking it over, and Victoria learned to step back and trust his expertise. Not everything was smooth. Catherine and Victoria's other wealthy friends struggled to connect with Marcus initially. At a dinner party in Victoria's penthouse, the conversation kept drifting to topics Marcus couldn't relate to: vacation homes, private jets, exclusive investment opportunities. Victoria watched him grow quieter as the evening progressed, and her heart ached. After everyone left, they had their first real argument about her social circle. "I felt like a museum exhibit tonight," Marcus said, his frustration evident. "Your friend Richard actually asked me what it's like to be one of the working poor, as if I'm some kind of sociological study. And when I tried to contribute to conversations, people nodded politely, but then changed the subject back to things I have no experience with." Victoria had noticed the dynamic, but hadn't realized how deeply it had affected him. They talked for hours that night, working through the discomfort. Victoria acknowledged that her friends could be unintentionally elitist, products of their privileged environments. Marcus admitted that he had been defensive, interpreting curiosity as condescension in some cases. They agreed that building bridges between their social circles would take time and that they needed to protect their relationship from others' judgments while remaining open to genuine connections. Marcus's friends presented different challenges. Some were openly skeptical of Victoria's intentions, warning Marcus that wealthy people didn't date community workers unless they were slumming or looking for a charity project. His best friend Jorge was particularly blunt. "She's going to get bored of playing house with you, man, when she wants to jet off to Paris for the weekend or buy a summer home in the Hamptons. Where does that leave you?" But gradually, as both groups saw the genuine love between Victoria and Marcus, skepticism softened. Catherine became an ally after a long conversation with Marcus about his work, discovering that his passion for community development aligned with her own interests in educational equity. Jorge warmed up after Victoria joined their weekly basketball game, played hard, trash-talked back, and bought pizza for everyone afterward without making it feel like charity. 6 months after the gala, Victoria and Marcus had created something neither had experienced before: a relationship that existed fully in both their worlds, honoring the reality of their differences while celebrating the depth of their connection. They had learned that meeting in the middle didn't mean meeting halfway on a financial spectrum. It meant creating entirely new ground, where wealth was acknowledged but not defining, where love was built on mutual respect, shared values, and the courage to be vulnerable across divides that society said were too wide to bridge. A year into their relationship, Victoria reflected on how profoundly her life had changed. Success metrics that once defined her world had been replaced by different measures. She still ran her companies with the same drive and intelligence, still made smart investments and strategic decisions. But now she also measured her weeks by Saturday mornings at the community center, by the progress of students she mentored, by evenings cooking with Marcus where the only agenda was being together. Marcus had changed too, though more subtly. Victoria's world had opened opportunities for broader impact with his community work, with resources from her foundation and connections from her network. His after-school programs expanded to 3 additional centers across the city, but he remained grounded, still living in his modest apartment by choice, still taking the bus to work most days, still finding joy in simple pleasures that money couldn't buy. The couple faced their biggest test when Victoria was offered an incredible business opportunity. leading a major tech company's expansion into Asia, a role that would require relocating to Singapore for at least 2 years. The position was a dream opportunity professionally, the kind of challenge she would have accepted without hesitation in her previous life. But now, there was Marcus to consider, and the community he served, and the life they had built together. They talked for weeks about the decision, working through scenarios and possibilities. Marcus could potentially find work in Singapore, but leaving his community center felt like abandoning kids who depended on him. Victoria could decline the opportunity, but Marcus worried she would eventually resent sacrificing such a significant career move. The tension revealed a fundamental question they hadn't yet answered. How do you build a future when your paths point in different directions? The answer came unexpectedly during a conversation with Maria, the community center student Victoria had been mentoring. Maria had been accepted to colleges across the country and was agonizing over choosing between her dream school and staying close to her family. Victoria was advising her to follow her dreams when Marcus gently interrupted. Actually, I think the real question is what matters most to you, not what sounds most impressive or what other people think you should do. That night, Victoria made her decision. She turned down the Singapore position and instead proposed something bold to her board. She would step back from day-to-day operations, transitioning to a chairman role that allowed more flexibility. It wasn't what anyone expected from an ambitious CEO in her 30s, but it was what felt right. Her worth wasn't determined by titles or territories. She had built something successful. Now she wanted to build something meaningful. Marcus was stunned when she told him, immediately worried she was sacrificing too much. "I don't want to be the reason you give up your dreams," he said. Victoria took his face in her hands. "You're not. You're the reason I'm finally clear about what my dreams actually are. I've spent 15 years building companies. That work will continue with excellent people in place. But I've only just started building a life that feeds my soul instead of just my ambition." She explained her vision, using her resources and experience to support social entrepreneurs like Marcus, people doing critical community work without adequate funding or business infrastructure. She would create a new kind of venture fund, focused not on maximum returns, but on maximum impact. Marcus would be her partner in this work, bringing his ground-level expertise to complement her business acumen. Together, they built something neither could have created alone. Victoria's business skills and capital combined with Marcus's community, knowledge and authentic relationships created an organization that truly served the people it claimed to help. They funded programs that addressed real needs because Marcus knew what those needs were. They implemented solutions that actually worked because Victoria knew how to scale and sustain operations. 2 years later, their impact fund had supported 30 community organizations across 5 cities, creating measurable improvements in education, job training, and youth development. More importantly, they had proven that different forms of wealth could combine to create something greater than the sum of their parts. Victoria brought financial capital and business expertise. Marcus brought social capital and community wisdom. Together, they built an organization that honored both contributions equally, demonstrating that true partnership transcends economic disparity when founded on mutual respect and shared purpose. The story of Victoria and Marcus didn't follow the script society writes for successful women and their partners. It didn't conform to expectations about matching incomes or comparable status. What it demonstrated instead was something more fundamental. That authentic connection happens between human beings, not between bank accounts or resumes. Marcus won Victoria's heart, not despite his lack of wealth and status, but because his lack of those things meant he saw her clearly, without the distorting lens that money creates. He offered her something no amount of wealth could buy. The experience of being valued for her character rather than her capital, for her heart rather than her holdings. Their relationship challenges the narrative that successful women need equally successful partners, that relationships require financial parity to survive, that love across economic divides is inevitably doomed. Victoria and Marcus proved that what matters most in partnership is not equivalent net worth, but equivalent commitment to growth, to honesty, to showing up authentically. They demonstrated that meeting someone where they are emotionally and spiritually matters infinitely more than meeting them at a particular tax bracket. The wealth gap between them was real and required conscious navigation, but it didn't determine their destiny because they chose not to let it define their relationship. To all the successful women watching this who wonder if authentic love is possible when you've outturned potential partners, Victoria's story offers hope. And to anyone who has felt less than because their bank account doesn't match their character, Marcus's story offers validation. Because in the end, the deepest wealth we possess has nothing to do with money and everything to do with our capacity to connect, to love, to see and be seen. That's the currency that truly matters, and it